today's dialogue. This event is co-hosted by SDSN Youth under the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, together with the SDGs Secretariat of the Office of the Prime Minister of Uganda. We're also proud to be part of the official program of the Youth-led Festival organized by the United Nations Youth Office, celebrating youth leadership and intergenerational action at the UN and beyond, as well as the 80th edition of the United Nations General Assembly, which has kicked off in New York this month. Our session, Shaping Policy Across Generations, Youth at the Heart of Global Decision-Making, comes at a historic moment. In 2025, years the World Program of Action for Youth Leadership no longer be symbolic participants, but as co-decision makers shaping policies that affect us all. Today, we aim to explore what this looks like in practice, nationally, regionally, and globally. It is now my privilege to invite Dr. Pascal Byarugaba, Deputy Head of the National SDGs Secretariat Office of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, to deliver his welcome remarks and officially open today's dialogue. Doctor, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone from across the globe. I want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this important discussion and our partners, of course, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, for convening this important discussion, but also to thank everyone that has found time to join this event and share their experiences, but also to learn from each other. I, on behalf, of course, of Government of Uganda, specifically the Office of the Prime Minister, the SDGs Secretariat, I extend warm welcome to all participants to this side event. We are proud as the Office of the Prime Minister to co-host today's dialogue with the SDSN, and which is focusing on and of course, in partnership with the youth, the UN Youth Office, this event is focusing on the shaping policy across generations, youth at the heart of global decision making. This is an important topic to discuss, given that last year we adopted globally the summit, the Pact for the Future, which is largely focusing on the youth and the young generation. And we hope that today's discussion will deliberate especially on how to implement the key considerations and actions and recommendations that were made and considered in that Pact of the Future. As often said, knowledge builds on knowledge, and likewise, policy builds on policy. And today, we build on the 30 years of global commitment for the youth. This year, 2025, marks the 30th anniversary of the World Program of Action for Youth, the very first global blueprint for youth policies and programs. This milestone is an occasion to reflect on progress and to renew our global commitment to meaningful youth engagements. And it calls us to renew our commitments to meaningful youth engagements in global decision-making, highlighting the transformative roles of young people in climate action, innovation, peace building, and civic life. As an example of Uganda's own experience, we see this in classrooms where today's youth and children are engaged in lively discussions regarding sustainable development. And this reminds us that the youth are not just leaders of tomorrow, they are partners for today. Their voices must guide our discussions on every decision that we make, especially in government and development partners, whether at local level or global level. We are here to ensure that young people's ideas and energy translate into real influence. We must move beyond token consultations. Instead, we should be committed to youth-led and youth-inclusive policymaking so that youth around the world can shape climate policy, dictate innovation strategies, civic initiatives, and peace efforts. Let me emphasize that youth are essential actors on the front line of change, and across Uganda and of course around the world, young people are leading climate action, pioneering different innovations and strengthening democratic life. They organize grassroots campaigns, launch new technologies, and empower their communities, whether composing songs about deforestation or mobilizing peers for civic action in regards to technology, climate change, and governance. And today, I want to, once again, to thank everybody who has found time. And we shall definitely be looking forward to hearing from our experts who will be sharing with us today, but also the many young people that have joined us. I think maybe some of us might not get an opportunity to speak, but we know whoever will be speaking will be representing our minds. I want to thank you once again, and the official open today's discussion. Thank you once again for God and my country.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pascal. It was very nice to hear from you, and especially what you mentioned about reflecting on the progress that we have made, but also very importantly, to reinforce our global commitment with youth. It is time to move beyond consultations. It's time to move to action, and it's very nice also to hear the great efforts that Uganda are doing, and we will delve into that in just a minute with your colleague as well. So thank you so much for your intervention. So now we're going to move on to our panel discussion, and joining us today we have a great panel of experts. We have Kansime Onesmus, Senior Officer of Knowledge Management at the SDGs Secretariat of the Office of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Uganda, Aska Mika, founder of Aurora Impact, Valeria Horton, former Mexican youth negotiator at COP and founder of Climate and Green Reconnection, and Toby Fung Lao, network coordinator of SDSN Youth Hong Kong. Thank you so much for the four of you for joining us today. Each of you brings a unique perspective to this intergenerational conversation, and now let's delve into that. So before we delve into the questions, let me briefly frame our dialogue. So over the next 45 minutes, we will explore how young people are shaping policy across different levels, from national coordination in Uganda to international negotiations to grassroots and youth-led innovations worldwide. So let's get started. The first question is for Kansime. So how does Uganda's integrated SDG coordination model ensure meaningful youth engagement in planning, budgeting, and accountability processes?
Oh, thank you so much for the question. This year, 2025, is a year among the years that have been part of many decades, where Uganda's national vision and global commitments have converged on our youthful population. We have a median age in Uganda of 17.6 years, very young population. More than 70% of our population is below the age of 30. And on the African continent, it's about 60%. So this proportion, of course, presents to us a demographic dividend, which our national visions, which we call the Vision 2040, the Agenda 2063, and the implementation of the SDGs must utilize. Fortunately, when we get to our Vision 2040, it explicitly emphasizes human capital development to exploit this dividend. Also, when you look at the African Union Agenda 2063, Aspiration 6, it calls for people-driven development powered by youth and women. To operationalize our Vision 2040, we came up with what we call national development plans. We are now in the fourth, and this fourth development plan carries forward this ambition of people-driven development, of human capital development, by aligning strategic objectives, including human capital, governance, and infrastructure, with the 4 pillars of the African Union Youth Empowerment Agenda, which include education, employment, health, and leadership. And these relate also to the SDGs about education, SDG 4, employment, SDG 8 on decent work, health, SDG 3, leadership on SDG 16, especially that part when we talk about strong institutions. As Uganda, we have an integrated SDG coordination model. And this model is rooted in the national frameworks and also the global agendas. So we came up with this coordination model in 2016. It has been operated comprehensively across board to fully mainstream the SDGs into national planning, to make sure that there is data for and evidence for planning and budgeting and allocation of resources, ensure that we monitor and evaluate the implementation of the SDGs, create awareness about the SDGs and the programs that the government is implementing, all people, including young people. So from the start of this SDG coordination framework, it was designed as a whole of society approach to make sure that the SDGs in Uganda are owned by all people, including the young people, to make decisions, to implement, to monitor and review, to demand accountability, but also to make and take good decisions. Institutional as a country, of course, we have embedded this mandate. If you have a chance at Uganda's 1997 Local Government Act, which emphasizes the need for representation of young people across board at the subnational level to be part of decision making. If you get to the Constitution, Article 78, which mandates that at least 5 representatives of youth must be in parliament. This means that the young people can be involved in oversight, can be involved in policy formulation, in resource allocation and prioritization to make sure that everything we do as a country responds to the needs of the young people. But away from those structures related to the SDG coordination framework as a country, we have what we call the Youth Coalition on the SDGs. This has over 100 organizations that are youth-led, that are youth-focused, and are working towards the attainment of one or two or all the SDGs. And this coalition unites these young people to ideate, to innovate, and also mobilize youth participation in the 2030 agenda processes. On the programmatic side, we have the NDP4 that I already talked about and the related initiatives. These initiatives target young people explicitly. Later on, if I get time, I might talk about the parish development model, which is Uganda's flagship program, reaching remote areas, reaching the underserved young people, and allocating 30% of each parish's revolving fund to the young people to make sure they invest, they produce, and contribute to the economy. Of course, all roses have thorns. This good story has challenges, especially in fully mainstreaming youth considerations and needs across all sectors, education, health, and so on, so that the young people's story is not only written in silos of youth programs, but is seen in every plan and budget. But despite these gaps, we already putting foundations as a country, very solid ones, to make sure that we overcome these challenges. The youth are getting organized. Some are already organized. Some have a platform for their voices through government-mandated coalitions, councils, and forums, and through partnerships with the development partners, and more importantly, the private sector, which of course affects the day-to-day lives of our citizens, of the youth around the world, and yet it is a sector that we least care about and should be prioritized. But nevertheless, the full realization of the SDGs, the Agenda 2063 for the African continent, and for my country, the Vision 2040. At the East African level, we have what we call the Vision 2050. Achieve all these, we must strengthen the mechanisms and the pathways that ensure that the youth are part of the leadership, and even when they are not, they are well led. I want to take it back to you, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Consima, for this great way to kick us off. And I love what you mentioned about the importance of rooting all these efforts in the national framework operated comprehensively across the national planning. These are things that governments need to do to ensure SDGs are well coordinated. And also this whole of society approach, which allows accountability at the same time to take good decisions and strengthen the mechanisms overall. So thank you so much for kicking us off with this great conversation. I want to move on now to ASCA. So youth-led initiatives often drive innovation in development. From your experience at Aurora Impact, why is it essential to include youth in decision-making spaces at all levels?
Yeah, thank you, Antonio, for that key question, and thank you for having me in the first place here. I believe that it is very essential, especially nowadays, to have youth in decision making at all levels, especially if you take the Arab region, because that's where I come from. More than a quarter of the population are young people, if you say, and to shape the future of our region, especially the policy and the current policy and the future policies must reflect their lives, their hopes and their deeds, right? And in my view, and I always say this, the future should not be built for youth. It must be built with youth and with their own perspectives and what they need in the 5, 10, 15 to 20 years that's up that's upcoming. And one example that I could give you is what happened in Jordan, uh, yeah, a way back. Yeah. So it's an example that took place for the National Youth Strategy between 2019 to 2025 this year. So this is when young people, they were consulted through civil society, private sector partners, and surveys. Yeah. So youth, they had a real impact because the government, they created structured spaces for consultation, and they actively listened to what their needs, their hopes, and their actual situation was. So their recommendations were taken into consideration, and it was integrated into the final policy of the National Youth Strategy. And their key priorities for the National Youth Strategy was skills development, civic participation, and most importantly, entrepreneurship, which is now a flourishing industry in the country, right? And all of these were formed to create the national strategy. So when you take a look at these, right, it shows a space where trust and accountability is given. The youth influence, it's not just symbolic, it's not even taken for granted and superficial aspect. It shapes the direction of policy. And especially when you take the Arab region, where youth face high unemployment and high instability, involving youth makes a key difference in the lives of people and in the lives that they hope to live. Because between when policies fail and when they fail to produce the life that youth want, when youth come in and when they give the perspective that they want, that's when the lives of people truly start to change, because youth actually build up for the future. They have the power to make lives better and to create the future that they want. Yeah, so I think that is why having youth in decision making levels is very essential. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aska. This is a very powerful message. I love what you mentioned about it's about building with youth, not only for youth.
Yeah.
This is very important because a lot of the times we forget that youth need to be part of the decision-making process, not only, and touching a little bit on what was mentioned at the beginning as well, not only on a consultation process, but also within the actual decisions that are taken. We need accountability. We need to develop the skills of the next generation and ensure there is meaningful youth participation. So thank you so much for bringing this perspective from the Arab region as well. Now I'm going to move on to Valeria. As a former youth negotiator, you have seen youth engagement in multilateral processes up close. What are the main systematic or structural barriers that limit young people's participation in policymaking? And from your perspective, which of these barriers can be addressed most urgently, and what will be the first practical step to tackle them?
Well, thank you, Antonio, for that question. There are definitely a lot of barriers that we still need to tackle. However, one of the ones that I've noticed that is most urgently is the one of timing. Let me share with you what that means. So youth is normally invited in general, like to these multilateral events, right? Like the COPs, ONGA that is happening right now, etc., right? And I'm going to talk about specifically my experience at COPs. For those that maybe are not aware of what COPs means, is Conference of the Parties. And let's say it's the most important negotiation on climate change at the UN level, right? And these COPs happen every year, only once. Normally at the end of the year, this year is going to be COP 30 in Brazil. And in these spaces that I have participated in the past, in the Mexican delegation, I've noticed the following when I engage with youth. There's a lot of things that you can do at COP, right? When you arrive there are 2 weeks where you can still negotiate with countries to reach an agreement on different topics around climate change. However, sometimes we're not aware that the governments prepare their agenda, their priorities, their opinions the year before, right? And the issue with that is that then the youth is invited normally just to the end of the process and not to the beginning. So we can think about COP, well, it's the beginning of the year, but also it's the end of the year, a whole year of preparation with internal, let's say, planning of the governments. So during that year, the governments have conversations with the private sector, civil society. Some countries do that. For example, in Mexico, we do that. But not everyone is aware that that's happening. And during that year, the countries normally prepare a document, which is called like their position document, where they finalized their points of views and priorities for these negotiations. So if youth arrives to COPs and they share their ideas until then, it's going to be really difficult to include your ideas in the negotiations. You can still do that, and it's definitely possible, and I have seen that, and I did that when I participated. But still, if you really want your ideas to end up at COP, for example, in these international negotiations, my recommendation is to learn within your government when would be the best time to pitch those ideas. And normally it's going to be prior. And there are a lot of events that happen before that. So my suggestion is that, right, first to learn when your contributions are going to make the most impact, but also to learn that sometimes these multilateral events is not the only or are not the only stages where you can have an impact. And finally, I would also like to share within that idea of COPs is that I've seen that a lot of young people in these events share their point of view, right? But they don't share like a concrete proposal. And by concrete proposal, I'm saying that it would be better to just share the text that you would like to see in the final decisions, because negotiators are really busy with a really busy schedule. So it would be better if you suggest specific text, and that could be really helpful. And finally, that leads me to my second point, that sometimes youth are only invited to the end of the process. We have seen that it exists, youth washing. The youth is getting better at identifying what is youth washing and what is not. But still, this is something that we as youth need to take a lot of, attention because it still exists. So how can we do that? Well, first, it's important to analyze like the program. Normally, youth participate in different programs and see that it is outcome oriented. So it's not only for the youth to be there and that's it, right? The idea is to be an active agent so that you can really make your contributions. So first, my suggestion is to do that, to analyze if the program is outcome oriented, and also as youth demand that these programs deliver reports of what was done, right? And we can actually even ask, for example, to negotiators of different countries when you deliver a proposal, ask for feedback. Did you really include my intervention or not? Why was it not included, for example? These are some elements and things that I've noticed that could help combat the youth washing in these spaces. That I think that these two aspects, the timing and the youth washing, are still really relevant at multilateral spaces.
Thank you so much, Valeria. And I think it ties up very nicely to what we have had so far. So first from Consima, we heard about what are the things that governments can do, which is to integrate SDGs, by instance, on the national frameworks, operationalize them, have this accountability. From ASCA, we heard about what youth innovations need to tackle, which is the skill development, ensure youth participation and entrepreneurship. But also what you're mentioning is very important. What is the role of youth within these spaces? We need to think about timing, which is one of the first things you mentioned, and ensure that we align the timing of our youth organizations with the timing of the government, so we are able to have impact from the beginning and not only at the end. I also heard about the importance of questioning why do we go to all these events, and if, whether they are the space to have these conversations or whether we can have them beforehand so to make them more impactful. And also think practically, what can be of most usefulness, let's call it, for the governments. Can be share the text, not only sharing an opinion, but actual text that they can integrate. And also, and you stated very, very, very importantly, the youth washing. We need to realize that it's happening now. We need to analyze the programs. We need to be critics as well, and see whether they are outcome oriented, and if not, we need to make sure that these processes are better off during time. So thank you so much for your contributions, Valeria. We're now going to move on to Toby. Toby, you work at the intersection of academia and youth networks in Asia. How can partnerships between youth, policymakers, and other stakeholders be structured to ensure mutual respect, trust, and long-term collaboration?
Right. Thank you, Antonio. I would say that a key factor for having these mutual benefits and the long-term partnership would be to be open-minded. Because for me, my background is for the voluntary part, I work as the network coordinator of SDSN Youth Hong Kong. But for my profession, I work with the government as an executive officer. So I'm exposed to the public service as well as to the sustainable development. And from my profession, one thing that is quite significant is to me is the policymakers in the public sector, they tend to follow the long established rules. So that means that once a rule is set there, for example, you can't do something or you must do something, they will just tend to follow the rules because they believe that the rule is set there for a reason. That's why if you're trying to change it or you're trying to add in your own way to do that, they may be a little bit worried that it may lead to some unexpected results and may disrupt the rationale of the policy. And so that's why sometimes some of the comments from the public is they sometimes will complain that, oh, come on, this policy is a little bit outdated. And it seems that it cannot meet up with the expectation from the public nowadays. So it seems that this policy needs updating. But of course, sometimes they may think that, well, if for policymakers, if we need to do a whole revamp or those stuff, it will take a long time. So why not we just stay the same? But of course, as youth, at the start of this discussion, we mentioned that youth is important in all levels of policy making. So I'm actually sharing a time in which I overcome one thing by putting some newly infused thing to make the policy to make it to benefit all parties. That is that I came across a couple of years ago in my work. That is in my previous department, I worked as an officer that is administrating some community centers in the community in which I oversee the facilities and so on. And one time I received a notice from a service department mentioning that the lift, the elevator in that community center has to be taken out of service for a few months for an enhancement work. But however, in that building, there's one tenant, they hired a disabled staff that needs to navigate with a wheelchair. So here comes the problem. If you take the lift to out of service for a few months, and apparently that staff cannot go back to her office to work, and this of course will cause grievances from that tenant. And of course, there's a policy that we cannot discriminate people with disabilities because we have to be inclusive. That's what we all believe, and it's also in SDGs. So how to do that to maintain the mutual respect and trust, because you have to get the lift enhanced or otherwise there will be accidents. And also you have to cater the need of the disabled staff. So at first I talked to the senior management and try to solve it the simplest way. How about we hire a wheelchair service just to cater that disabled tenant so that she could go up to work in the morning, and then we have this service in the evening to bring her down from her office to the exit so that she could access the building even without the lift. But here comes to some constraints of the public policy, that is we have to make good use of public money, prudent use of public money. So the senior management has concern that you are hiring this wheelchair service for just one single person. So that's not cost effective at all. So is there any other way to do that? And for this second solution, okay, how about we try to relocate the staff to another tenant, because we have several floors. It's a multi-story building. How about we just relocate the staff to another office, another tenant's office to do that? And of course, the employing organization of that disabled staff, they declined because they said, no, she's a key person to the financial division, and we need her to be physically present in the office to do all those stuff, to handle all those claims and so on. And the other tenants, they also have concern that while we are not that comfortable to have an outsider working in our office. So again, this is not a way. And lastly, I proposed one solution, and this solution was adopted, that is have the concept of work from home. But bear in mind that this accident happened before the pandemic, where work from home was not really that popular, because before 2020, all of us are going back to our physical office. We work in the office physically, and there's not much a concept about work from home. But at the end, we use work from home to solve the issue. That is, we first discuss with the tenant in which period will that stuff be very much essential to handle all those financial stuff. Of course, you won't have financial stuff to handle all year round. Of course, there will be some period that you can, of course, the staff can have less duties. So we first work out the timeline with the tenant when the staff could work from home, and then we relay the message to the mechanical services department that, okay, during this period, you can do the lift service, lift enhancement service. So at the end, of course, a few months of negotiation between the parties and work out all the solution, but finally, thankfully, it worked. And I was very glad that the senior management accepted my bold proposal of having work from home, to allow that staff to do that. And so, also I'm bringing in also a concept that I recently learned, because I'm currently doing a master's in public policy, that fits today's context. Recently I learned about I'm not talking about deeply into economics, but the professor mentioned about what is good economics and bad economics. If we want to have mutual respect, trust, and long-term collaboration, we have to think about good economics. That is, you're not just focusing on the effect or impact to one certain group of stakeholders for the moment. That will become bad economics because you just focus on the benefits of one single group. We have to think about not only the short-term effect, but also the long-term effect on all stakeholders. So this will make you think deeply on how your policy could affect everyone, and so that you can balance the pros and cons of different parties, and you can you can come up with a policy that will be, I will not say the best, but it fits everyone. So the takeaway message here will be to be open-minded and to think about how you could work out the best to cater the benefits of all stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toby, and thank you again for sharing also about your experience. That is also very nice to hear, real life experiences of how we can all work together in this importance of co-creation among stakeholders. At the end, we need everyone on the table in order to bring policies that are robust, that have everyone's in mind, as you were mentioning, that we follow the good economics path, and that we consider what are going to be the effects of these policies on the long term, not only on a short term that might only benefit some. So thank you again for this very important messages. We're going to move on now to Kansime again. So in what ways the flagship initiatives like the Parish Development Model, the PDME, and youth-focused cash-first interventions demonstrate how national development strategies can operationalize the Pact of the Future's call to leave no one behind, especially for young people in rural and underserved communities?
Thank you. Uganda is one of the few countries which did or which have done a leave no one behind assessment. And in this assessment, we identified the different groups disadvantaged by social status, body physicality, persons living with disabilities, disadvantaged by geography, disease, and others. And because of these factors, a number of people are left behind. We are happy that during the process of developing the Pact for the Future, we were consulted, and we took the initiative to bring the civil society on board, the private sector on board, and the youth on board. And this was after we had also done nationwide consultations ahead of our voluntary national review that was carried out last year. We are glad that most of the Pact for the Future's actions reflect some of the things that we aim at as a nation, as a continent, and also the general picture of our globe. When we return from the Summit for the Future, we continue to agree and underscore in the same way as the Pact for the Future underscored on the importance of investing in young people. A priority that, of course, aligns seamlessly with Uganda's demographic realities. Given that we have the youngest people as the most, the government cannot run away from having them as a priority, or else would be living to be a lie. So with this, the government is creating an enabling environment to make sure that the young people contribute meaningfully to the economy, so that they produce, they add value, they have access to markets and an income, increase the exports that we have, and the capital inflow into our nation. And we have taken initiatives which include the Youth Livelihood Program, and this is one that puts cash in the pockets and hands of young people, and also implementing initiatives to skill the young people in the technical, vocational, and education and training. So when we came back from the Summit for the Future, we had what we call the Summit for the Future Symposium as a nation. And here I wanted to unpack the Pact for the Future and start the pathway to domesticate it. We looked at the youth and future generations. And in this annex, we looked at 4 strategic interventions. One of the interventions is to expand initiatives for skilling the young people. The second is provide financial support and market accessibility for young entrepreneurs and innovators. The third was prioritize outreach to marginalized groups and out-of-school youth with grassroots-friendly initiatives, which of course include the parish development model. It's called parish because it goes down to the lowest administrative unit, which is the parish. And it targets people in remote areas because most of these parishes and the target population is in villages, slum dwellers, are disadvantaged by geography. The other intervention was to address systemic barriers that exist. These might include violence, might include the poor access to opportunities by the young people, discrimination on the margins of sex, of education levels, tribe and others. So addressing those systemic barriers is something that we looked at as one of the strategic interventions. Now, Uganda's parish development model was launched in 2022, and it embraces the principle of leaving no one behind. It's a pathway for us to operationalize that principle because it takes development to the most remote areas, to the parish, which is Uganda's lowest administrative units, to reach populations that have been marginalized by past top-down programs. And it targets 39% of households which are still in the subsistence economy. The subsistence economy is moneyless, meaning people produce to consume domestically, to eat, without having an excess, an extra for sale, earning income, value addition, and increasing the GDP, the gross domestic product of our nation, and lifting them up into the cash economy. One of the ways to implement the SDGs is what we call local action. And the parish activities at the parish, interventions at the parish are a pathway to local action. And for me, that is what I might want to call the last mile delivery approach, which ensures that even young people in remote villages can access financial services, can access good infrastructure at their doorstep. And part of this model is not only delivering or giving cash handouts for investments to young people, but making sure that each parish has a secondary school. There are about 10,500 parishes across the country. So look at all those secondary schools, making sure there is a health facility, and making sure that there is an operational administrative unit to address people's issues. Now, we also have the cash fast support for the youth livelihoods. Maybe before I go to those, I admit that we have challenges in the parish development model. And these are things we are taking step by step, 3 years into the road. We still have decades to go with this model, so we shall keep improving them. The cash first support for youth livelihood. Of course, alongside this parish development model, Uganda has rolled out a youth-focused cash first interventions, which put money into the pockets of young people, into the hands of the underserved youth to improve their livelihoods. This youth livelihood program, which is a government program launched in the year 2013, 2014, we are now getting into the 12th year of implementing this. It targets poor and unemployed young people aged 18 to 30 nationwide. So rather than only doing the traditional training schemes, the mentorship schemes, and the capacity building, how about we give capital that is interest-free and revolving funds to the youth groups to start small businesses, to start social enterprises, to innovate in their communities and earn an income. One of the key strengths of these interventions is the built-in participatory governance, that the young people are involved in decision-making. When we're coming up with the intervention parish development model, we consulted the young people. What should be the percentage to the young people? Then the young people said, we want 70%, because we are 70% of the population. But then we said, okay, now there are some women who are also young people. They also need to benefit from this. So to make sure that everyone in society benefits, we had to come up with a percentage that would benefit the young people, especially those that were in active innovation and entrepreneurship. And we drew to 30%. But it was because of the effort of the participatory governance that allowed them into decision-making, now into implementation. They are now into oversight and also the formal accountability. But of course, as a country which has an experience in these interventions, and also drawing from the lessons we have taken from other countries, and the discussions we have had with countries that are yet to start, there is a need to deepen the gains in line with the pact's intergenerational recommendation and vision. That moving forward, we need to scale and target inclusive finance, which has a deliberate focus on the youth that are farthest left behind, especially those in hardest reach areas or those disadvantaged by the factors that cause discrimination. We need to institutionalize youth participation, because some wonder, should youth participation be at the mercy of politicians, of elders, of leaders? No, it should be in the law. We need no mercy. It should be in the law. It should be legislated. It should be codified. There should be penalties for those who do not institutionalize and also follow the codes, government mandated codes on youth participation. So it should be institutionalized. We need to improve data and partnerships, because now we cannot plan for young people in these interventions when we don't know how many they are, where they are, how they are affected. We need disaggregation of statistics on youth employment, on enterprise creation, on enterprise sustainability, on the vulnerabilities that they face. We need social indicators in rural areas, in slum areas, in areas affected by geography and others, because then we shall use this information to fine-tune targeting of such programs to make sure that they're effective, the young people benefit. By the same time, we need to foster multi-stakeholder coalitions to co-finance youth empowerment. I talked about the private sector. It is something which we have not yet, I don't know in other countries, but here we are trying our best to make sure that the private sector is fully on board. And their badge should read purpose beyond profit, to create jobs, to protect the environment, to ensure social inclusion, to protect this planet, to contribute to economic growth of our nation, but not at the expense of the other pillars of sustainable development. So the Paris Development Model and the Youth Livelihood Program are here to empower, to make sure that the youth who are farthest left behind are brought on board, and also at the end of the day, benefit not only our country, but also the entire nation. I thank you, moderator.
Thank you so much, Councilman, for this great intervention and for bringing a lot of knowledge to the audience about the parish development model. It's very empowering to hear how you have been able to take these SDGs, which are this global framework, and adapt them to these national and local circumstances and guarantee these different aspects of development, of prioritize marginalized groups, address all the systematic barriers. And I cannot stress more what you mentioned about the importance of institutionalized youth participation. This needs to be on the laws of every country. We need to guarantee that this is addressed by policymakers, and what we cannot measure, we cannot improve. So I also support what you're mentioning about having data disaggregated, so we know what are the main constraints youth are facing, where do we need to put more efforts. So thank you so much for all these powerful messages. Coming back to Aska, from your experience building Aurora Impact, can you share an example where the inclusion of young voices directly influenced a policy or an initiative, and what made it possible for you to have that level of impact?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned it earlier as well. It's the Jordan's National Youth Strategy. But I think I'd like to mention something else as well, which is very prime to the UAE, and it's called the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change. It was launched in the UAE, of course, and what this program entails is that it brings young leaders from across the Arab region. So you take Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Bahrain, Lebanon, and so on and so forth. So, so what they do is they design policy recommendations that feed into the climate strategies and partner directly with ministries, international organizations, private sectors, and all the stakeholders that are very relevant to amplify climate solutions. So I believe that this model is very applicable and very relevant because it's not symbolic and it's not superficial. It's very um, useful, and it's very comprising of meaningful participation, because youth, they sit alongside, like next to each other, obviously. Uh, uh, they sit with decision makers from all intergovernmental and all the examples that I mentioned, and they really craft clear channels for their ideas to shape into national and regional strategies and priorities that really integrate into climate level policy papers. And I really like what Mr. Onesmus mentioned as well, because we really need to prioritize institutionalization and accountability for youth, because the example that I mentioned, the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change, um, this idea should be replicated in other regions as well, because youth need to be given a really permanent seat into the governance structures and not just taken as a temporary consultation anymore, right? Because our input, the input that we give, it needs to be linked to measurable outcomes, so that decision makers, they are accountable for responding to the priorities that youth need. Because at the end of the day, if you see all of the elements, they make a key difference between the youth council, yeah, and and any and this shouldn't be just a photo opportunity anymore. And these type of interventions, they should really drive a policy change that changes lives and futures for the coming years. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aska, and for bringing that example as well of the Arab Youth Council for Climate Change. This is a great example of how when young people are placed in the same table as policymakers, we are able to contribute together and to actually co-create the recommendations and the policies that are needed in each one of our countries and our regions. And I couldn't stress more, again, the importance of the institutionalization of youth within the different policy making spaces. So thank you again for supporting that. Now, moving on to Valeria, what successful models of youth engagement in policy or governance have you witnessed or been part of that could be replicated or escalated? We have heard from Aska, but I would like to hear more from your side. And in adapting these models to different contexts, what key factors must be preserved to maintain their effectiveness?
Thank you, Antonio. There are definitely some models out there, but I would like to share maybe specifically the one that I participated on. So when I mentioned previously that I was part of COPS, it was because of a youth program. This program was in collaboration between the Mexican government and the Climate Reality Project and other organizations like UNICEF. The first version of it was in 2021, I believe, and it lasted 3 editions. And this program, what it did was that it trained the youth for a couple of months. So let's say it was a call at a national level saying, do you want to participate in international negotiations? Then people applied to that. 35 young Mexican leaders were selected for this program and were trained during a few months, as I mentioned. And then out of those, they selected 4 participants to go to the negotiations at COP27, which was my case, and be lead negotiators of different tracks. So what I mean by lead negotiators is actually like having the microphone, being in front of everyone and representing your country. This program had a huge, let's say, traction because other countries got inspired by what Mexico was doing and other Latin American countries. So Operación COP, which is the name of the program, was implemented in more than 10 Latin American countries and also closely collaborated with another program that's called Youth Negotiators Academy, which also covers other regions in the world. So the lessons that I learned from this program were the following. First, that it's really important to think about capacity building because the UN is a whole world by itself. And even you can speak with negotiators that have participated on these tables for decades, and they tell you that they are still learning. So first, let's not fear that as youth, we need to know everything. Definitely no. We need to continue training ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we need to be, perfect to participate in these spaces. However, capacity building is a huge thing that we should always consider when we're building youth programs, instead of just sending the youth to whatever event or whatever space and hoping that they perform good, right? The second thing I believe it's important to consider to replicate this model is that the youth needs to be an active agent. And this has been shared throughout the whole conversation, right? We don't need more photo opportunities, as Aska previously mentioned. We need active roles. And maybe your country won't give you the opportunity to be a lead negotiator, but you can be an advisor, or you can also be there beyond like an internship level, right? Like these roles are really serious. And then another thing that I believe that we should focus on is how the youth that participates in these events or in these programs can help the next generation. Because I see a lot of efforts being lost of youth participating in a program, and then they move on with their jobs or they're no longer youth and that's it. So how can we share what we learn in these spaces with the rest of the young people? Of course, funding is a huge thing. Without funding or financial support, this can't be possible. So for Operación COP, that was covered by the different organizations, governments, etc. Actually, some governments didn't have the money. And I know that that could be a huge barrier, right, for some countries. However, the program itself secured some funding from other, organizations. So that's another idea that I could share. And yes, think about how can we report on outcomes and share that knowledge with more people. So as I mentioned, this program, it lasted for 3 years. And it was really, really successful in Latin America. And I see that from that program, other countries started to consider youth as serious actors at the negotiation tables. And that was, incredible and really kind of historic. So hopefully that can continue. And it has continued in other forms and in other programs, right? But if we can think about how can we replicate this in our country? Maybe those could be the steps that I wanted to share with everyone.
Thank you so much, Valeria, for complementing also what has been mentioned before about the importance of building the capacity of young people in these policy-making spaces and the importance of not letting the pressure takes us. These are high-level spaces. There's a lot of pressure, but we don't need to know everything because nobody knows everything. Even the people there, the ones that we feel are more experienced, they are also learning. So at the end, it's a learning process, but the importance is that we work together to also teach these young people how to best navigate these very complex high-level spaces. Now, Toby, moving on to you. In a very short sentence, how can we move from symbolic or tokenistic participation to meaningful and sustained youth engagement in decision making?
Right, thank you, Antonio. I think it will be to have opening more pathways for youth to take part. Because as I've observed in Hong Kong, there are not really that much pathways for youth to join in. So sometimes youth may, for example, they host a little campaign online, but those may be too symbolic. If there are some government-based official platforms open up for youths, I think this can get rid of the symbolic thing and to make it to be more meaningful. I've seen that in the Hong Kong government, they want to have more youths involved. They really want youths to make an impact. So that's why since 2018, 7 years ago, they launched a scheme that is called Member Self-Recommendation Scheme for Youth. So those youths that are passionate about certain topics, they could recommend themselves to join some official committees in order to really voice out their opinion at official platform. For example, if they are focusing on education, and if in that phase the government opens up a committee for education, of course those public committees consist of some of those not youths. They include some, for example, professionals like headmasters or professors from the education sector, but youths can recommend themselves to join in, because the government wants this to be enhancing the interaction and trust with the government, and also to engage young people in the public affairs. So that's why, to sum up, these kind of engagement, I've seen that it will be quite useful, because youths, they contribute around 10% of the community size. Of course, you can say the community is small, just 20 people. There are only perhaps 2 to 5 youths, but I'm sure these all can make some significant impact, because the youths, they could work as a normal member in those committees to make policies, make decisions for the benefits of the city and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toby. And this definitely complements what Valeria was mentioning, that also from a government perspective, we need to open more pathways for young people at different levels. They can be advisors, they can be actual policymakers, but we need also this support and this engagement at different levels of the policymaking process. So our last question before passing on to the public, and this will go to Kansime. In a short sentence, how can the global community ensure youth-led accountability innovations for strengthening intergenerational policymaking and monitoring at both national and UN levels?
Thank you. You said in a short sentence. Allow me to do this in short sentences, very few. So for me, I want to commend the global community, the global leaders. For some time, they started and are still reaffirming the importance of youth participation and also the importance of intergenerational equity in policy making. Even recently in 2024, if you look at the Pact for the Future, adopted at the 79th General Assembly, which commits to inclusive governance and also meaningful youth participation in all processes across the globe. and its annexes, if you look at the declaration on future generations, which calls for protecting the well-being of those to come and those who are already around, explicitly promoting intergenerational equity and integrating youth into policy making and decision making. We saw the establishment of the United Nations Youth Office, and I am yet to find out if the UN Youth Charter has been tapered. If not yet, it is something we need to push. So these new bodies, these new norms, practices, and cultures complement the Pact's Action 37 provisions, which are to establish a dedicated funding for young people and also require that all UN agencies and member states mainstream youth engagement. And of course, system-level institutionalization strategies, which we need to adopt across the board. I talked about data infrastructure, and also making sure that there are open data platforms which address the needs of young people is very important. We need dedicated funding windows where budgetary commitments are made. Governments and donors are creating earmarked funds for young people to innovate, also participate in accountability and monitoring of activities that affect them. When you look at intergenerational governance bodies, which of course coin around the intergenerational dialogue which we need, all formal institutions, not only government, not only United Nations agencies, but also the private sector and the civil society, which is actually largely the entry point for youth engagement, they must guarantee youth roles in decision making. It should be a guarantee, codified. At the international level, we need reforms in the UN review processes. There is no reason why a voluntary national review should be accepted as national if it has no evidence of youth engagement and accountability. There is a need for each voluntary national review to say or have a summary on how young people have been engaged in the development of such reports. We need to know what the youth shadow reports say, because it is a good practice and it should be codified. And of course, these youth shadow reports fill that gap, because most voluntary national review reports are looked at from the national lens, from the politician's lens, from the technical person's lens who has maybe something that they are not saying. So these shadow reports fill the gaps between the government narratives and the youth realities. And this is not to leave out the other groups, women, persons with disabilities, and others. So in practice, when it comes to ensuring that there is integration of youth-led accountability in programming and M&E framework, I want to see all United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks have a reflection or are explicitly sound on integrating youth accountability in programming and M&E frameworks. We need to see governments, member states, United Nations country teams, and also mobilize the private sector and civil society organizations which are adopting the Youth 2030 implementation guide on recommendations to include youth-focused indicators and mandate engagement with national youth forums, national youth councils, to make sure that whatever each stakeholder is implementing prioritizes youth needs and has a positive impact at the end of the day on the lives of young people. So it is no longer a secret that we need to integrate youth-led accountability. And it requires both hard systems, it requires the change of culture, and already the frameworks that are available, such as the Pact for the Future, stress it. The interests of future generations must be discussed by the young generations who will live longer than any other existing generations. And that would mean that should we make any bad decisions, they will suffer the costs. Should we make good ones, well and good, they will reap the gains. So at all costs, we must have them on board.
Thank you so much, Consima, for definitely bringing more other aspects to the conversation and about the importance of once again bringing all these stakeholders together. It's not only about governments doing the frameworks, it's also about the civil society, the private sector, and the other stakeholders involved to also include youth in different aspects, in programs, in initiatives, because at the end, this is a joint effort. And the importance of creating these funding windows for youth as well as the accountability. I love how you frame it as integrate youth-led accountability. And this is very important because at various levels, we still have a lot of gaps of information in different countries. So we need to institutionalize also the reporting and the accountability framework. So thank you again for bringing this great perspective from your country and for sharing that with our audience today. Now we would like to open the floor to participants. So we have already received some questions in the chat and we will do our best to bring in as many perspectives as possible considering the time given. So the first question is from Bella and is to Valeria. How could they manage the involvement of youth legally? In most countries, the youth is still dependent on the generosity of politicians to appoint them. If they don't want to do, is there a possibility to do it somehow, or what other recommendations could you give to youth in this matter?
Thank you for that question. So, from my experience, what I've seen of other youth participating at international events is that if their governments maybe is not directly supporting that theme, or maybe it's not in their agenda or priorities, what you can do is the following. First, try to reach out to your country's allies, or to the main allies. Maybe they have something that already exists similar to what you're advocating. And then you can take that as an example to your own country and say, like, see, this other country is doing something similar. Maybe this could work in our context. If not allies, there's something else that's called negotiation groups. So, for example, specifically at the UN Climate Change Conference, countries negotiate like in blocks or in groups. So find out which group is your country part of and see if that is also part of the agenda of that negotiation group and see how you can engage. Other things would be, as a question that Antonio asked me before, to get examples of success and then try to pitch them to your government. And finally, if that's not even possible, maybe try to involve with organizations at international level that could have more impact beyond what we can do locally. And they can really advise you on how to address certain themes that could be delicate in your country. I know, for example, human rights could still be something of an issue for certain countries. So that could be something that you can do, be part or get involved in international organizations that could protect you as a youth advocate of these themes, and that they can, paint a clearer path on how you can have an impact within your government too.
Thank you so much, Valeria, for sharing these recommendations. They are very, very useful. Now, a question from Manar, and these are to Aska, and then I will move on to Toby, is how can young people from different backgrounds, cultural, geographically, economically, can participate equally in decision-making spaces?
Yeah. Hi, Manar. Thank you very much for the question. Can you please specify the question again?
Yes, for sure. So how can young people from different backgrounds, let's say cultural, geographical, or economic, can participate equally in decision making?
Yeah. So I think it's important to see which aspect of SDG or which aspect of advocacy that you're interested in, and take part in any civil society organization or any any advisory board that you're interested in. But my first recommendation to you is to see and join a civil society organization or a youth advocacy group. So for example, if you're from the South Asia region or the Arab region, we have youth societies known as ISEC. So ISEC is a large a youth organization, actually the world's largest youth organization. So it would be best if you could join that, because you work on actual SDG projects, which will help you to network with a lot of global partners, such as private sector organizations and also civil society, and also your national um, uh, so sorry, your national offices. So yeah, so I think that's one of the best places to start, because personally speaking, I also started from there, and that's when I gained my expertise in in decision making as well. Yeah. So yes, yeah. So I think that would be one of the best examples for you to join. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aska. And now
Oh,
for
it's
you,
honest.
Toby, how can young people from all these different backgrounds participate equally in decision making?
Right. Thank you. And actually, I would like to add a little bit on Aska's response. I will suggest two ways for you to do that. Of course, the first way is quite similar to Aska's suggestion. That is to join some youth-focused organizations. I would say that those youth organizations, not only they are providing some like recreational or services for those youths, but some of them they also equipped with a little think tank to for youths to voice out their opinions and to for example produce a statement to give a statement on certain policies so they could make an influence in the society. Through participating in those think tanks, of course, most of the youths that you encounter are maybe from the same city or same area, but you can meet people from diverse backgrounds, because we all are from different disciplines, and people, of course, with view a certain topic from different perspectives. Because these kind of public youth organizations, they very much welcome youths from all, just anyone who are passionate on certain topics. So of course you could expose yourself to different to engage people from different disciplines. And the second way I would say is in universities. I believe some people here, you are maybe from tertiary, still doing your tertiary education, or some maybe graduated, but still in universities there some organizations, for example, there's some research institutes, or even someone just mentioned in the chat, the ASAC. You could meet people from different backgrounds. Of course, if you're in university settings, because we have non-local students, of course, you can also meet people from different countries, different culture as well. So these two places are good ways for people to start. For example, in universities, you can form form a small group or an interest group to, for example, research on certain topics of interest, or to voice out your opinion on certain topics, and to integrate what you have learned from your studies, and to bring it and to share it to, for example, your classmates, your schoolmates, and so on. Yeah, so these two ways I would say are suggested for people who like to engage with others from diverse backgrounds and culture.
Thank you so much, Toby, and thanks again, Aska, for complementing this question and about the importance that there are different spaces. There are universities, there are youth organizations, there are government initiatives that you can join. So it's also about raising the hand and being part of this group, so you can also help little by little making an impact. People have asked me also, like, how can I get into all these spaces? Well, the first thing is to raise your hand, to reach out to all these organizations that you would like to be part of. And, in a simple email, ask, how can I join you? How can I help you? Do you need any support at the moment? And believe me that can definitely change your path and also help you to initiate your advocacy process. So unfortunately, we don't have enough more time for questions, but you can reach out to youth@unsdsn.org and we will answer them via email. So thank you once again to this amazing contribution. I have also seen the chat and see a lot of conversations going on, and it is great to see that. So as we close this conversation, a few points are clear. First of all, youth must be embedded in decision making at every level. It needs to be institutionalized from the planning and budgeting nationally to accountability mechanisms globally. Also, thank you so much to Kenzime for sharing Uganda's experience that show us that with integrated coordination models and targeted interventions, it is possible to design systems that truly leave no one behind. To move forward, youth-led innovations and intergenerational partnerships are not optional. They are essential for building legitimacy, trust, and solutions that endure, especially at the times we are facing right now. It's very important that we work together to advance on youth-led empowerment. But perhaps the most important takeaway is this: when youth and institutions work together, policies stop being abstract and they become lived realities that change communities, that change realities, and that help us to definitely bring youth forward and bring them at the center of the conversation. On behalf of SDSN Youth and the SDGs Secretariat of the Office of the Prime Minister of Uganda, I sincerely thank our speakers, Kanzime, Aska, Valeria, and Toby, for your insights during this panel discussions, as well as to the opening remarks. Thank you so much to the Dr. Pascal Byarugaba for his great introduction to this panel and to this conversation today. And thank you so much for everyone for your engagement and for being part of today's discussion. So this concludes our event, but before we all go to our respective commitments, we would like to take a picture so we remember this moment. So if you could all please turn on your camera for a few seconds, we're gonna take a picture. So please turn it on, smile, put your best face, and we are gonna take a picture. Raquel will tell us.
We're ready. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me take another one.
Yes, bring this cameras on, everyone. I see them all coming. 3 seconds. 1.
1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Amazing. Thanks everyone again for your time today from being part of this discussion. And this concludes our event. Thank you so much. And let's continue building a future where intergenerational collaboration is the standard, not the exception.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.